Quick Tech Talk with your host, Michael Anderson.
Hey folks, this is the Tech Talk, where we talk about cutting edge and future technologies. I'm your host, Michael Anderson, and today we're joined by Daniel Sloan, the co-founder of FutureTech, Blockchain Saw, and many other technology companies. Today we're talking about the topic that everyone is talking about, which is COVID-19. And today we're specifically focusing on how technology can help us return communities to their places of worship. So Daniel, thank you for joining us.
I appreciate it, Michael. I'm excited to talk to you today.
So when you and I agreed to have this talk, you were telling me about your Rebuild the Chain project in response to the corona pandemic. Can you tell me a little bit more about what Rebuilding the Chain is about?
Yeah, so it's a pandemic management platform. And, you know, in the absence of a vaccine, really a non-pharmaceutical solution is the only option that we have to kind of combat the coronavirus. Our partners, joint venture partners, Accubits, actually developed the technology, and they're working with various governments to deploy this and kind of use it. So we started looking at not only from a government side, but how could we use the technology to kind of help businesses, help enterprise manage their people. So it's evolved from the first version of the platform, which is for government, to a version for enterprises. And then the version that I've been talking about the most is for business. And then I guess for our topic of our conversation today, we could almost change that to for worship, right?
Yeah. So on that note, like you said, without a vaccine for COVID, we have to have a non-pharmaceutical solution. So how exactly can we use that technology to reopen places of worship while still keeping people safe?
Again, the biggest issue with COVID, as we all know, is that people could be asymptomatic, right? So you could be walking around not showing any symptoms and passing the virus to people. So just because you're not feeling sick doesn't mean you aren't. And so that creates quite a conundrum when you're thinking about wanting to be in a space like a church, to where, you know, you're all packed in there together. It seems nearly impossible to try to go to church and social distance, right? So how do we reopen, you know, churches and places of worship and do it to where it's kind of like pre-COVID, right? To where we can go in and shake hands and hug and really, you know, have the experience we want to have. So Rebuild the Chain, the technology enables us to create what's called a safety zone, or commonly referred to as a green zone, right? Really quickly, a green zone is basically a cordoned off area that has controlled entry and exit points. And so with this situation, what we would do is we would set up testing as part of the process to get inside the green zone. So that way, you know that everybody that has gone inside has been tested, is negative for COVID, and that way you can move about freely.
Yeah, that's great. And so how does blockchain technology play into that testing?
We implemented blockchain on the government version of this for one simple reason. You need a large population density to have an effective app, right? So you need at least 50% of your people using it to be able to know where the hot zones are, things of that nature. And I think it's interesting when you look at, like, let's say India, for example, they developed an app, they deployed that app, and less than 5% of their population downloaded it. And, you know, I saw these news stories about, you know, they started kind of laxing the quarantine, and the deaths from COVID just spiked. It's crazy to me, but it seems to be a reality that people would rather risk their lives than to download an app that they feel like they're going to be spied on, right? They'd rather take their chances and get this deadly virus and potentially kill them than to voluntarily download an app that could potentially keep them safe. So blockchain technology enables us to encrypt the data in a way, without getting too technical, that it locks that data with the private key. So without that private key, nobody can view your data. It's hash data. It's gobbledygook to them. It's numbers and zeros. And I even go so far to demonstrate the point to say, if, let's say, you were to get tested for COVID and you're positive and you have it, and the government says, hey, you know, I want to unlock your data. I want to know where you're at and I want to know where you're going. If you refused, if you were an anarchist, Michael, and said, no, I'm not giving you that data, they couldn't hack it. There's nothing they could do. So with the For Business edition, which we're talking about here today, we still have that data protection and privacy on your data. So again, it's not like the government version where you're tracking and things of that nature, but for data privacy, it's very important. And so the blockchain plays a piece into that. And then it's giving you an immutable record of all of your testing, right? Mm-hmm. So the goal is to be able to utilize this to be able to go other places that might be creating green zones and say, hey, here's my health card, because the system gives you a health card once you've been tested, and that's how you get in the green zone. Well, if the people that are running that green zone want to, basically question the veracity of that, right? And say, well, how do I know this is real testing? How do I know you've actually been tested for the past 12 weeks? Well, if it's on a blockchain, that's an immutable ledger. So it's trusted. You don't have to trust to say, well, I don't know if this testing history is real. Did they fake this? And that's the biggest problem. How can you trust that the data is true? And the blockchain provides that trust.
So it sounds like this will allow you to track even beyond places of worship or churches. You could partner with other entities who are on this platform that are creating other green zones and track the movement of tests across those borders.
So the idea and the goal is again, we were hoping that at a government level, they would implement the technology, and then they could start establishing green zones around transportation hubs and other areas. And then businesses that want to implement it could plug into that and then have their own version of the technology for them to create a green zone around their area. I actually wrote an article about green zone, and I use, in downtown Houston, we have a convention center called George R. Brown. And the Rockets basketball stadium's right there. Minute Maid Park is where the Houston Astros plays. There's probably about 7 or 8 blocks. And then there's all kinds of hotels and shops, and there's a giant park there. Yeah. So if you were to set up that area as a green zone, then everyone that enters that area could go everywhere inside of there, right? So instead of having a separate green zone for, the Rockets, a separate one for the Astros and for Georgia Brown, you could literally make that whole area, and you wouldn't need multiple implementations of the technology. You would need one rebuild the chain for all of that area. So we're even looking at businesses that want to kind of come in together and say, hey, we're all, in this 3-mile square radius. Why don't we all reopen, set this whole area as a green zone? We need one implementation of rebuild the chain for us all to have it. So we're excited about that. And then kind of to talk about places of worship, the idea is if the Catholic Church, the organization or association that manages all the Catholic churches in the U.S., if they were to buy the technology, we could set it up. Now, it would take a little bit of doing to have each church in the U.S., but each church wouldn't need their own implementation. You could do one nationwide Catholic church implementation of rebuild the chain, and then all the churches that are part of that would benefit. And so they could all plug into the technology, set up their green zones, and basically reopen. So that's a bigger vision, right? Is to not just open up my church, which is New Hope Church, not just open up Joel Osteen's church, but let's, on a national level, let's have one implementation of tech. So maybe some of the smaller churches that wouldn't be able to afford the tech could benefit from it.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So do you see this implementing this technology solution being a way to bring greater unity or community together for these worship organizations?
Well, I don't know about you, Michael, but for me personally, I feel like there's a little bit of a hole in my life of, it's great. We were on YouTube, we're watching service. Our pastor actually does a thing on Facebook every day that I'm not on Facebook. My wife has been watching it and telling me about it. But, we're doing our best, but there's no substitute for actually that fellowship, right? You go into church, seeing your friends and the people that you worship with, and, the music and all of that, right? It's an experience, but I understand why we're shut down. I mean, I would feel terrible if I was asymptomatic, went to church, and all of a sudden infected a bunch of people, right? That's terrible. So what is the solution? And that's what we feel like Rebuild the Chain is, that solution, right? We can implement the technology with the testing, set that church up as a green zone. And so now we can operate once we're inside, just as we did before, right? We all know we're COVID free. We can hug each other, like I said before, and we can come back together in that place of worship with the peace of mind of knowing that, we're doing it safely.
That's great. That's a great solution and very timely, especially with the lag of vaccine development, which is very complex and very hard to do. It's great that you guys are able to implement a technology that really meets the needs of all stakeholders, that individual people have their anonymity and through blockchain, as well as larger organizations can keep all of their members safe. So great work, Daniel.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Michael.
Great talking to you today.
You too.
See you next time.
Appreciate it. All right. Bye-bye.